Right, Al, I think the subject I want to get into right now is remasters,
Mm.
reboots, remakes. Is it good for gaming?
Mm-hmm.
I had some thoughts around this subject, and I'm just
Yeah.
gonna go through them just to seed our conversation with some information
Yeah. Yeah.
or some points of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Around the subject of remasters, reboots, and remakes, I just thought to myself, is it nostalgic or lazy? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
With the popularity of retro, is it actually desirable?
Mm-hmm.
Are the reasons for it the generation transition? Is it because the hardware has now a bit more continuity and therefore it's easier to port over?
Mm-hmm.
Investment in games is so expensive, so by doing this, are studios de-risking themselves?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if PlayStation or Sony buy Bluepoint, will we expect more remasters or remakes on the Sony platforms?
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing to consider is, and this is more of a positive spin on it, at the moment lots of games are locked away on legacy consoles like a PS3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So by obviously offering a remake, remaster, or reboot, whatever it may be, on a new platform, we're able to, share that experience with a wider community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the points I had in my mind around this subject. I don't know about you, Al, but I just see more and more remakes, more and more reboots, remakes,
Mm.
remasters, you know, extended versions, director's cut, the PS5 version of a PS4 game, so
Yeah.
we hear more about this type of, let's say, game
Mm.
than we do new IP.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's not the only industry that's doing it, right? There's lots of the movie industry have been doing remakes, reboots of stories for years, right? So
Yeah, definitely.
with not always the best results either. So, so
Or, remakes of, let's say, non-English speaking movies that they kind of like
mm,
delivered to the kind of Western world, or the English speaking world, I should say.
mm. Yeah, the Western version of it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's not always good either, right? Even the whether it was The Ring or Old Boy or all the other classics, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, old boy. Girl with the dragon tattoo. That was another one. There's so many of them, really, if you want to be honest. And
yeah,
there's
yeah,
quite a few you don't even know about. You know what I mean? Like, that people don't talk upon, right now.
yeah. But sometimes a good story, and if you've got technology to as you kind of covered, to bring these more to life, and if it doesn't actually cost you too much, then great. If it costs you a lot of effort and time, then maybe it's not worth it as well. So, because I guess the way gaming has kind of shifted away, from more, how should I say, monetization techniques, that your traditional AAA titles have kind of had less appeal, especially to the big kind of corporate companies that will look for a good amount of profit kind of return from it. So it's a difficult justification in some cases. But I do like seeing some of the I think I've said on the previous podcast, looking forward to Mass Effect and actually Command and Conquer remaster. I'm just waiting for that to be the right price, and then I'll grab that as well.
Yeah, and I guess we have Diablo 2 coming out
Mm,
as well. I mean, but for sure. I mean,
mm,
that, for us personally, I guess that's more of the nostalgia play. I
mm,
mean,
mm.
back in the day, obviously, we really enjoyed these games. We have fond memories about the kinds of experiences and emotion that it provoked.
Yep.
And to a degree, we kind of want to relive that.
Mm-hmm.
So from our perspective, good thing. From the publishers and maybe the developers' perspective, it's another way to kind of draw more out of the kind of IP.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I look at it.
I think the interesting one out of them, right? If you look at the market that they were going for, Command and Conquer Remaster still isn't that great in terms of an RTS, in terms of the newer, more modern ones. It is holding on to the purse strings of nostalgia of people that have played it before, want to play that again, and have that nostalgic moment of Tesla towers and all those sorts of things, and and those angles. But I think a story like Mass Effect, because it was so long ago, bringing it to a new age of gamers, essentially, it just brings forward that IP again, and hopefully gives, I guess, more hype back to the next Mass Effect, which I think they're going back to the original, at least part of the story chain, not necessarily the same Commander Shepard and that sort of stuff, but off the same lineage and continuing beyond that, rather than continuing on from the mess that was Andromeda.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think kind of remakes, remasters, or reboots are necessarily evil. In many circumstances, that's what the gamer wants.
Mm-hmm.
They actually want the content, and if we want it, then publishers and developers will make it and they'll sell it to us, and we'll wrap it up. There's no doubt about that. But I just sometimes wonder, is it stopping the IP from being created? Or am I being just a bit too kind of negative about that? I just want, no matter you say, games are kind of time-consuming, expensive things to make.
It kind of depends if you have, I guess the ways games are being developed now. You've got multiple studios, not necessarily the same studio doing the same franchise and the same IP. Even if you looked at Call of Duty, there was kind of two branches, whether that was the Modern Warfare branch. Exactly, and they were kind of in cycle year on year, so that they have 2 years to essentially produce the next game of their release and cycle, which allowed them to. You could feel it. You could feel the games were different based on the two studios. But I think also that was the same problem that happened with Warcraft 3. So Warcraft 3, I think they had a separate studio that actually looked after kind of producing that particular remake, and unfortunately that that fell the wayside, and didn't really produce what they were kind of looking for. And there's quite a few articles coming out now of various crunch and various kind of issues with Warcraft 3 itself and why it ended up the way it did, which is really unfortunate because it was such a fundamental and key game that spawned a lot of IPs, from the back of its, kind of custom map making as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other way it could go, right? Whereas you go into it thinking it's a less of a risky position because it's a tried and trusted IP, and you could also say it's probably potentially less expensive to develop. Because some of these remakes will basically build on top of the existing kind of game code and game logic. They'll just give it a shiny kind of set of clothes.
Yeah, you should be able to reuse some of the assets, right? Whether that's some of the models, some of the voice, the sounds, all that sort of stuff. Unless you did what what Warcraft 3 did, was also state that they were going to have new cutscenes, new voice lines, and everything, which actually I think worked in their detriment. Promising those things.
But I mean, something like Demon Souls. PS5 uses the original AI, is what I understand. But if this sort of stuff again isn't really kind of handled well, you kind of really souring the IP. It's a bit of a danger.
Yeah, especially with, I think Warcraft 3 was the first Blizzard game. You could argue it was post Activision Blizzard and taking over and all that sort of stuff, and some of that you could argue is to blame, maybe. But it does tarnish that. That original Blizzard kind of mentality of, it will be ready when it's ready, and they'll release a good game, when it is ready. And unfortunately, Warcraft 3 just wasn't. And actually, it's 18 months down since it was originally released. It was released back in Feb 2020, and a lot of the fixes that they promised still haven't turned up. It doesn't feel like it's going to improve anytime soon either.
Wow. I mean, it was actually pre kind of Activision. I think Activision took a bit more interest in maybe they were taking an interest all along, but I mean, certainly when World of Warcraft dropped, I think Activision basically dropped their money. But the whole Warcraft 3 thing is, like I said, this example obviously leaves a kind of bad taste in a lot of gamers' mouths, obviously. But it's kind of irresponsible, isn't it? It's kind of, you've got this cherished kind of bit of IP, you should be looking after it. How in the world do they let this happen? For me, that's staggering. I mean, like, certainly from that perspective, one of the negatives you could take from remakes is like, look, you've got to handle the IP correctly. This is a cherished kind of piece of IP, and get ready for a backlash if you don't. Get ready for a backlash.
there's going to be diehard fans around it, right? Which want that same experience, want to have that same experience again, and if not better. And unfortunately, it was just lacking. And yeah, like you say, it just leaves that sour taste, that kind of mistrust, I think, going forwards as to, will they want to trust Blizzard, Activision again? The ones that may have pre-ordered, will they pre-order again? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it just makes it so much more difficult because that trust has been essentially broken from, one of these particular examples.
And it's far harder to get back when it is a cherished IP. That's the thing. Far harder, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's certainly one of the negatives. But I just do hope Blizzard and Activision decide to try at least try and turn this around. As an act of goodwill to the fan base. Because the reality is they could have done a lot with that.
Yeah, but I think they're doing. I mean, Diablo 2 has been a lot more open, right? And I'm already seeing stuff like, I think they're already in alpha tests, and there's already lists of they're very transparent about this one. The lists of improvements that they're doing, quality of life type stuff, and I'm honestly, it's one of those that I've not pre-ordered a game in I don't know how long, but this is probably one that I probably would, even off the back of Warcraft 3.
Yeah, well, the whole pre-order thing makes me laugh sometimes because if you're getting it on a digital download, then what's the point?
Well, it's the what is it? They normally give you added benefits, right? Extra skins, extra this. So yeah.
You'll forget you'll even have those skins after about 24 hours.
That's true.
I guess the other point I would make also is that we've often talked on the podcast about the continuity of consoles becoming more and more like a PC, where you can carry old software across.
Yeah.
For me, that also means that they're kind of closer together from one generation to generation. A little bit more similar. So that for me means games are easier to port across.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's put my cynical hat back on. I mean, you could effectively bump up the resolution, get better quality textures, apply some 3D audio. You could obviously increase the resolution, the frame rate, and maybe kind of tack on the DLC that you basically had, put out for the game.
Yeah.
And you could call that the Definite Edition, and you could sell that for maybe close to a full price game. Would anybody be the wiser? Yeah, that's an easier port.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of see that as a little bit of a danger when people are doing that. Is that on the one hand, I can see that during a generational switch, you want to give people a chance to play some of these games on their brand spanking new shiny machine, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's kind of like, feels a bit lazy. I need to be careful about when I say lazy, because coming from a technical background like yourself and done the whole development thing, and even if you were going to do some of these, even if you weren't going to create a new IP, you were going to enhance what you had, the engine or the game that you have, that's a ton of work still. That's still a ton of work, right? So when I say lazy, it's just kind of it's not entirely accurate.
Yeah, well, I think we're less exposed to, how should I say, particular engines and particular industry formats. I think some of the stuff that we probably do is I guess more native technologies in some way. It probably depends on how vendor exposed you are as well in some cases. But
you can imagine if the artist basically who created a set of textures and whatnot, if they didn't render those textures in a high enough res at the time, do you redo them all? That takes time. Should you just shove it through DLSS or? Well,
shove it through
I'm not going to listen to any of that marketing. But it's a fault, isn't it? It's a fault. It's so when I say the word lazy, I'm trying not to kind of overuse it or use it use it wrongly. It's just that there's still effort involved here. It's just that it's lazier than if you could have produced totally new IP.
Yeah. But I think that's a problem with, how should I say, create creative IP and good creative IP, because there's also dangers of it's the other problem is like sequels, right? Sequels which are not as good as the one before. It's just you tarnish the IP from that. Take Andromeda as an example. So
that's a very interesting perspective. I mean,
so if you've got
but
Go on.
could you? Because there are some. I mean, back in the day, and I'm sure even now, there are some sequels that are so close to the original game. In actual fact, is that a remaster or a reboot? I'm trying to think if there was a game that I played in the not too distant past, yeah. But if you know what I mean.
Yeah. But that was the sort of yearly iterations from whether it was FIFA or the other ones. So, I mean, EA have been doing that for years for all their sports categories, right? So
that's very, very true.
But yeah, and I think that's why it's important as a consumer of those products, we keep them honest as well. Don't just, I mean, yeah, if you enjoy it and if that's the only game you're going to play all year, then fine, you buy the iteration or something. But you'd want to keep them honest. You want them to improve the product, the features, and those sorts of things to give you something else, right? If they give you the same thing, what's the point? and some of that feels even like you could argue Destiny 1 and 2. It felt like it was the same old stuff.
Yeah. And I actually prefer Destiny 1. If I'm being honest. I mean, not the downgrade that we got for the second one.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point. We talk about remakes, but really, the yearly iterations of some of these franchises that we're used to. What are those exactly?
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
Yeah. And it's interesting because, and Ubisoft are already starting to do that, right? They're moving towards that, literally almost all their IP being live service type things, which means you're just playing a thing. Will there ever be iterations of it in the future? Maybe not. Maybe you could call it a version release or something. But maybe the engine stays the same. I don't know. We're coming into that new age of lots of kind of live service kind of games. Whether it's vying for our time availability, right? Which game can you actually spend your time on?
To a degree, Al, that would make, let's say, the sequel, or the remake, or the reboot, or the remaster a bit redundant. Certainly, if you were going from platform to platform, or generation to generation, certainly, that style of remake might no longer exist because you just take the service onto the new platform with the bells and whistles that you can add to it, but it's still the service. So you could argue that really. That's also an interesting perspective. I mean, and some points coming out here that I didn't really expect to be coming out, if I'm being honest. But now we start talking about it. Well, okay. Philosophically, does this mean that, or does this mean this? I mean, on the positive side of things, some of the platform owners are, let's say, they're producing the Xbox Series X enhanced version or the PS5 enhanced version, typically free of charge. Yeah, it's just a patch.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's definitely the good side, and I'd say that's more like a remaster. It's more like a remaster, and obviously we used to get charged for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The fact that's happening, that's definitely good for gaming.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely good for gaming. But of late, what I'm seeing from Sony in particular is the director's cut. We've had
yeah. Was it Spider-Man?
Spider-Man was more of the Ultimate Edition with Miles Morales and
You're thinking Death Stranding, maybe?
Death Stranding,
yeah.
Director's cut. And to be fair to that has a lot of, new content, not just kind of graphical updates. Ghost of Tsushima, they've got a Director's cut coming out for that. But again, interestingly, that has a new island, which is apparently 20 hours of extra gameplay in that.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, if you take those just two, and then you think to yourself, "Geez, is that a sign of things to come?" You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. I really kind of appreciate that they've gone back to these games and try to enhance them and whatnot, right? But I mean, is this the sign of things to come? Or is it just something they're going to have in place for just this generational shift?
I think it's a gap whilst you kind of move over to it as well. I think.
Yeah.
A lot of the new creative IP, I think, is slowly coming, and quite a few of them would probably be quite hidden until they're ready to release something that feels like a good idea and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might say this is. I mean, listen, if Sony are being above board, then this is just something they're doing because of this transition.
Yeah.
Potentially give the new PS5 owners a bit of software that they can play on the machine that shows off the capabilities of said machine, but gives them new content, not just about redoing exactly what was there. That's good. But clearly in the back of their minds, they're also thinking, well, there's not a lot of new IP, and that's coming later because games are expensive and they take time to develop. So in the interim, we'll just kind of redo these games and we'll kind of sell them close to full price. So that's to be fair, that's also happening. But at least they're giving us more gameplay elements. More gameplay. Like it's not just a remaster, high resolution and whatnot. I think that's really interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, in some games, I would like to see literally just a remaster. Upgrading some of the graphics, because some of the gameplay back on the old games was still really good. I'd love to see a Command and Conquer Generals. I know Command and Conquer Generals 2 has gone very quiet and almost disappeared.
No, I think it's more or less dead. I think they canned the project. It was just like shame, because I was kind of looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But on the whole kind of remaster, remake, I feel that in order for it to come across, I think, let's say consumer-centric, gamer-friendly, it should be about unlocking some of those classics.
Oh yeah.
Of older platforms and just freshening them up. I'm pretty sure some of the developers at the time, they wanted to do things they couldn't because they were, let's say, limited by the technology we had back then.
Yeah.
That would be super stellar.
Yeah.
Commit some time and resource to that. That would be a great way of doing it, rather than just kind of bumping up the resolution.
Yeah.
That's where I take exception with some of this stuff. No one needs to bump up the resolution. Just to, build it into the console. This back compat stuff. Give us a little, a patch or something.
Yeah.
Something like, let's say, Metal Gear Solid, back on the PlayStation. Remade for modern times, not rebooted.
That needs a remake though. Because the first one, the engine and the limitations of the PlayStation 1 forced it to be the way that it was. You look at the more modern Metal Gears. If it could be in that style, awesome. Yeah,
but what I mean by reboot as opposed to remake, Metal Gear Solid should still be about Metal Gear.
Oh yeah.
And Snake should basically talk in the same way, fundamentally look in the same way. He shouldn't be a different character.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, plus or minus falling out with voice actors and.
Yeah, plus or minus. But that can be usually addressed via a check. And like you said, the limitations of the old hardware lifted, and that would be amazing because still to this day, I think Metal Gear Solid has some of the best, let's say, set pieces. And some of the best boss fights. It's a classic.
Yeah.
That could really benefit from the new hardware and the new technology. I mean, even to the degree, I don't know if you've kind of been following Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. Even that is not a straightforward, remaster where they've bumped up the resolution. Yeah. They've actually adjusted the gameplay elements in it.
Yeah.
And gone back and basically resolved or improved some of the problems they had. So that's what we need.
And it's the same with we forgot about Final Fantasy VII, obviously with the remake there. I mean, they split that into chapters and stuff like that. But the first one was relatively well received for all the upgrades they did.
It looks amazing. I mean, if you remember what it actually looked like, wow. I mean, that's what you want to see. But the essence of the game, the look of the characters, you would recognise them.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? There's no doubt who those guys are.
Yeah, it's quite funny when you look back at really old, retro, nostalgic games and you go, did it really look like that? Did it? Because I think your mind almost changes it. It makes it look better in some way in your own mind as you kind of interpret the image. So.
It's the emotions you felt at the time, and you kind of feel like a sense of wonder for certain games and satisfaction when you finished it. And that's what you actually carry on with you more than, you know, remembering kind of the fidelity of the thing and whatnot. I mean, that's where Sony, I think, could play on the nostalgia, where they could kind of deliver good remakes. Don't want to call them remasters, because remasters to me just, you know, it's like a film remaster. You know, we'll bump up the resolution. You know, the resolution. They've got such a back catalogue. There are so many gems in there, and gems that we've even forgotten about. Yeah. You know, they could most definitely do that.
Yeah. Cool.
So I think we've talked about remasters, reboots, remakes, and I think, is it good for gaming? It's like everything else. In balance, of course it is. Taking too far one way, no. But I think we should keep in mind that obviously there's a lot of old beloved titles out there. We'd love a remake, or you know, even for some games a reboot.
Yeah.
It's not so sure about The Last of Us, however, but we'll see how that develops. So is it good for gaming? In balance, yes. But, you know, again, let's be fair, let's not take it too far. Let's just not do it for a quick buck. Let's try and give some of these beloved, you know, pieces of IP the respect they deserve, for one thing. I mean, start with that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't turn it into another Warcraft 3, for God's sake. Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah. I think that's a lesson to be learned by all the developers and publishers.
Indeed. And with that said, let's move on to the next topic.